Back in the mid-90s, the Philippines stood at a crossroads, facing a decision that was going to shape its entire future. The government was ready to join the brand new World Trade Organization, but a huge wave of opposition rose up, claiming the whole thing was unconstitutional. This fight went all the way to the Supreme Court, and in a way, it put the entire nation on trial.
So what was this all about? Well, it really boiled down to one massive question that countries are still struggling with today. Do you build walls to protect your own industries, or do you tear them down and compete with the entire world? That was the high-stakes choice right in front of the Philippines.
Okay, so to really get what's happening here, we got to rewind a bit and look at the huge global shift that was underway. After World War II, a whole new economic order started to take shape, one built on this idea of countries working and trading together. It all started way back in 1947 with something called GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. For the next few decades, different countries got together for these big negotiations they called rounds, and each one chipped away at the barriers to trade. This all led up to the massive Uruguay Round, which created the big one, the World Trade Organization, or WTO, in 1995. This wasn't just another agreement, it was a permanent global institution, a real game changer.
So who were the fighters in this legal ring? Well, in one corner, you had the petitioners. These were lawmakers, NGOs, all sorts of citizen groups. Their argument was simple. Joining the WTO is unconstitutional. And in the other corner, you had the respondents, the Philippine Senate and other government officials who approved the treaty. They said, no, this is a totally valid choice, and it's going to be great for the country.
The first major clash was really about the soul of the Philippine economy. The petitioners were arguing that the nation's own constitution demands that you put your own people and industries first, and they believed the WTO was about to tear that whole idea to shreds.
And their case was built on some really powerful language, taken directly from the Constitution. I mean, listen to this from Article 2, Section 19. It calls for a self-reliant and independent national economy effectively controlled by Filipinos. To the folks suing, this was a crystal-clear command: protect our own.
And it didn't stop there. Article 12, Section 10 goes even further. It says the state must give preference to qualified Filipinos. They called this the Filipino First policy, and they argued it was a sacred, non-negotiable part of their national identity.
But here's the catch, and it's a big one. One of the absolute core pillars of the WTO is this principle of national treatment. Basically, it means that once a foreign company or a foreign product is inside your borders, you have to treat it exactly the same as your local ones. No special favors. You can see the collision course, right?
So you've got these two ideas just slamming into each other. On one hand, the petitioners are saying, look, these are totally incompatible. You can have Filipino first, or you can have the WTO's national treatment, but you can't have both. But the Supreme Court, well, they saw it a little differently. They argued that the Constitution wasn't written to build an economic fortress around the country. It was meant to build a bridge to the rest of the world.
And this is where the court's reasoning gets really interesting. They said that these nationalist principles in the Constitution, they're not absolute commands. They're more like guidelines that have to be balanced with other national goals. In fact, the court pointed out that the Constitution also talks about making industries competitive in both domestic and foreign markets. So the goal wasn't isolation. It was about smart, strategic integration.
Okay, so that was the economic argument. But the next challenge was huge. It was about power. The petitioners weren't just worried about money and business. They were afraid that joining the WTO meant giving up the Philippines' very power to govern itself.
Their argument was pretty straightforward. They basically said, look, by joining the WTO, we're agreeing to change our own laws to match international trade rules. This is a massive surrender of our sovereignty. In their view, it was like tying the hands of their own elected leaders.
But the court pulls out this really fundamental principle of international law, pacta sunt servanda. It's a fancy Latin phrase, but all it means is agreements must be kept. See, the court's point was that when a country willingly signs a treaty, its sovereignty isn't being stolen. It's exercising its sovereignty to make a promise.
And the government's response was basically, hey, we do this all the time. They pointed out that the Philippines had already signed tons of treaties that limit its absolute freedom in some way, from the UN Charter to tax agreements to deals about which airlines can fly where. Voluntarily taking on international obligations, they argued, is just a normal part of being a country in the modern world.
So, after weighing all these massive arguments about the economy, about national power, about sovereignty, the Supreme Court was finally ready to deliver its verdict on one of the most important cases in the nation's history. And the decision? It was clear and decisive.
The petition was dismissed. Period. The Supreme Court ruled that the Senate had acted completely within its constitutional powers when it voted to ratify the WTO agreement. It was official. The Philippines was legally a member of the global trading system.
But the court made an absolutely crucial distinction here, and this might be the most important takeaway of the whole case. It wasn't saying that joining the WTO was a good idea or a bad idea. That's a policy debate. The court's only job was to decide if the action was legal. The question of whether it was wise, well, the court said that's a question for the elected branches of government and ultimately for the people who vote for them.
And you know, that leaves us right back where we started, with that same fundamental question. This case was never just about the Philippines in the 1990s. It's about this timeless tug of war between security and opportunity, between protecting what you have and reaching for what you might become. It's a question that every nation in every era has to answer for itself.